The galaxy had watched them rise, one conquest at a time. Planet after planet, worlds so dangerous that no other species dared to land, fell under their rule. They called themselves the HFY, and they were more than conquerors. They were hunters. Their fleets crossed the stars like predators crossing open plains, never challenged for long, never outmatched. When they claimed a death world, they didn't just take it, they broke it, bending its fiercest life to their will. For centuries no one stopped them. And then they found a signal. It was faint at first, almost lost in the static of a distant star's radiation. A pulse of data, nothing remarkable, until they decoded it. Coordinates, a planetary designation, and a word in a language they didn't yet know: Earth. The HFY scouts arrived expecting another victory. From orbit the planet didn't look unusual. Blue oceans, green continents, a scattering of megacities. It had the same signs of civilization they had seen before: settlements, roads, energy grids. Yet the readings told them something else. Earth was classified by their own interstellar hazard scale as a Class 9 death world. The highest they had ever seen before was Class 7. In their arrogance they didn't hesitate. The first contact was not a battle, it was a test. They sent a small force to probe the defenses, expecting resistance but nothing they couldn't crush. What they found was something no HFY soldier had ever experienced. The humans didn't just defend their cities, they fought in the forests, in the mountains, under the seas. They moved through fire and smoke like it was nothing. Commander Red Han, one of the HFY's most decorated strategists, stood on the bridge of his warship, reviewing the early battle footage. He had fought on worlds where the air itself burned, where predators the size of tanks hunted anything that moved. And yet, watching humans fight gave him a sensation he didn't recognize, something that might have been unease. In one grainy clip, a HFY assault squad advanced through a ruined street. The humans were outnumbered, cornered. By logic they should have surrendered or fled. Instead they advanced into the crossfire, using the wreckage as cover, striking with precision and a kind of reckless bravery that ignored their own survival odds. "They don't retreat," Red Han muttered, almost to himself. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Thur, gave a sharp click of amusement. "They're undisciplined. No sense of fear control." But Red Han didn't answer. He had seen fear before in soldiers and in prey. What the humans had wasn't the absence of fear, it was something else entirely. Days passed and the HFY escalated. They deployed armored walkers in dense city centers, expecting to break morale. Instead they lost them to improvised traps and relentless human counterattacks. Entire human units vanished into the wilderness, only to reappear behind HFY lines, striking supply convoys before melting away again. The reports piling onto Rethan's desk began to change in tone. At first they had been confident: mission objectives, enemy losses, standard operational updates. Now they carried words like unexpected resistance and significant losses. From the human side the story was different. In a bunker beneath the shattered skyline of a coastal city, Captain Lien wiped the dust from her face and studied the holographic map flickering in front of her. HFY red markers surrounded them on all sides, but her eyes were fixed on a single flashing blue dot, an extraction route through the industrial sector. "They'll expect us to run," her sergeant said quietly. "Good," she replied. "Then we won't." The plan was dangerous, bordering on reckless. Strike deep into HFY positions, take out their local command hub, and throw the entire sector into chaos. The humans had no illusions about winning the war outright, not yet, but every move that slowed the HFY bought time for the rest of the planet to prepare. The night of the strike, rain hammered the ruins, turning streets to rivers. Lien's team moved in silence, the only sounds their boots on broken pavement and the distant rumble of alien engines. They reached the outer perimeter without being seen, slipping past automated sentries that scanned for heat signatures. Humans had learned to mask those weeks ago. Inside the HFY command post, the air was thick with the scent of alien oils and the low hum of power generators. The guards didn't expect them, didn't even realize they were under attack until the first charge detonated. By the time the HFY commander raised the alarm, the humans were gone, leaving behind a tangle of collapsed walls and shattered comms arrays. The following morning, HFY fleets orbiting Earth received conflicting orders, their ground forces cut off from centralized command. That was when the human counteroffensive began in earnest. From the high mountains, artillery rained down on enemy positions. In the coastal waters, submarines struck supply lines. Everywhere the HFY turned, there were humans, never in the same place twice, never giving them the direct battle they wanted. On the HFY flagship, Redhan watched the reports with a growing sense of realization. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were adapting faster than the KRYTH could counter. Every tactic used against them was met with a new response, every weapon studied and then exploited. Redhan had fought the deadliest predators in the galaxy, creatures that could kill a soldier in seconds. But predators acted on instinct, even the most intelligent ones. Humans didn't just act, they planned. They anticipated. They learned. The war was no longer about whether Earth would fall. It was about how much the KRYTH would lose trying to take it. Still, the KRYTH didn't retreat. Pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, they began preparations for their largest offensive yet, an attack meant to crush humanity in a single, decisive blow. Every available ship, every soldier, every weapon was being called to Earth's orbit. In the shadows of a ruined city, Lien's team intercepted fragments of KRYTH transmissions. The scale of the coming assault was staggering. If the KRYTH succeeded, Earth's defenses would collapse within days. But there was something else in the data. Hidden among the orders and fleet movements was a set of coordinates, deep in the KRYTH's own territory. It was heavily encrypted, but the Human Intelligence Division cracked just enough to see what it meant. It wasn't just a base. It was where the KRYTH kept something they couldn't afford to lose. If humans could strike there, they might not just save Earth. They might end the KRYTH's reign over every Deathworld they had taken. Lien stared at the coordinates for a long moment. The decision was impossible. Stay and defend their home or strike at the heart of the enemy and risk everything. She didn't speak, not yet. Outside, the distant hum of KRYTH war machines was growing louder, echoing through the ruins. The choice would have to be made soon. And somewhere in orbit, Redhan stood at the viewport of his flagship, watching the blue planet turn below. In all his years of conquest, he had never faced prey like this. The thought came to him unbidden, and it unsettled him more than any weapon could. Maybe humans weren't prey at all. The sky over Earth began to burn as the first wave of the KRYTH's final assault descended. The storm over the city hadn't let up. Sheets of rain blurred the broken skyline, turning the jagged ruins into dark silhouettes against the glow of fires in the distance. Lien stood at the edge of the bunker entrance, watching the night and listening to the far-off rumble of artillery. It had been like this for weeks, an endless rhythm of strikes and counterstrikes, the city's heartbeat replaced by the pulse of war. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp concrete oil, and too many people crammed into too little space. The survivors, civilians and soldiers alike, moved quietly, conserving their voices and their energy. No one knew how much longer the supplies would hold. She stepped back into the bunker, nodding to the guards at the door. Her sergeant was waiting near the command table, his expression tight. "Recon team's back," he said, jerking his head toward the map. "You'll want to hear this." The recon leader, a wiry man with mud streaked across his face, leaned over the map projection. KRYTH forces are moving in from the east, heavier than we thought. At least 3 armored divisions, maybe more. Lien studied the red clusters that lit up on the holographic map. They weren't just coming in force. They were pushing toward the industrial sector where the old transport tunnels ran deep underground. If the KRYTH took those, they'd have a direct route into the heart of the city's remaining defenses. "How long?" she asked. 2 days at most. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. 2 days wasn't enough. The outer districts were already in shambles, the remaining defensive lines barely holding. And with the KRYTH massing for a final strike, the margin for error had vanished. But there was more. The recon leader hesitated before speaking again. "We also intercepted more of their encrypted chatter. The same coordinates as before. Deep in their own territory. Whatever's there, they're guarding it like it's sacred." The room went still. Everyone knew what those coordinates meant. Hitting that target could shift the war, maybe even end it, but to get there would mean pulling some of their best units away from Earth's defense at the worst possible time. Her sergeant broke the silence. "It's a trap. They want us to divide our forces." Or, the recon leader countered, "It's their weakness. The one thing they can't afford to lose." Lien didn't answer right away. Her mind drifted back to the first days of the invasion, when the KRYTH's superiority had been overwhelming. Back then, survival had seemed impossible. But humans had adapted faster than even she thought they could. Every encounter taught them something new: how to break the KRYTH's armor plating, how to jam their comms, how to slip past their sensors. And each small victory had cost the KRYTH more than they expected. In the KRYTH flagship high above Earth, Commander Redhan was fighting a different kind of battle. Reports came in from across the planet, Units lost in ambushes, supply lines shattered, weapons caches destroyed before they could be deployed. His officers offered explanations. The humans were desperate, unpredictable, undisciplined. But Red Han wasn't convinced. Desperation didn't explain the precision of the human strikes, or how quickly they adapted to new tactics. Desperation didn't explain the way they fought for ground they knew they couldn't hold, just to bleed the KRYTH of time and resources. He pulled up the latest data on the planetary scans. Even after weeks of bombardment, the human population centers were still active. Not just active, they were resisting. And the longer the war dragged on, the more dangerous they became. Thur stepped into the command chamber, his armor still damp from a surface inspection. The final wave is ready, Commander. Once deployed, Earth will fall within a week. Red Han didn't turn from the viewport. And if it doesn't? Thur hesitated. It will. But Red Han had been fighting wars long enough to know that certainty could be fatal. Something about Earth was different, though he couldn't yet put it into words. They were not the strongest enemy he had faced. Not the most advanced. But they were relentless. Below, in the bunker, Lien sat with the intelligence team, cycling through the intercepted KRYTH transmissions. They weren't complete. Chunks of data had been corrupted during relay, but enough remained to see patterns. One phrase kept repeating in their language, always in proximity to the coordinates, the heart of the chain. What does that mean? The sergeant asked. Could be command control, the recon leader said. Could be a power source. Could be something else entirely. Lien thought of the KRYTH's history, how they had swept across the galaxy taking Deathworlds one by one. If there was something at the heart of their power, something they couldn't replace, then striking it could do more than just win a battle. Could stop them everywhere. But to do it now, while Earth was still under siege, that was the gamble. They worked through the night, sketching out possibilities, cross-referencing with old exploration data and whatever fragments had been gathered from captured KRYTH equipment. Outside, the rain never stopped, and the distant rumble of the enemy's advance drew closer. By dawn they had a plan. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good. But it was something. In the KRYTH flagship, Red Han issued his own orders. The fleet was to prepare for full orbital saturation bombardment before the ground forces moved in. It was risky, the humans had proven adept at slipping through chaos, but it would soften resistance and force them into the open. As his officers dispersed, Red Han lingered by the viewport. The blue and green world below didn't look dangerous. But the longer he stared at it, the more it unsettled him. He thought back to the first day his scouts had reported human resistance. He dismissed it then, chalking it up to overconfidence in their abilities. Now, weeks later, the humans were still here, still fighting, still forcing the KRYTH to spend resources at a pace they had never experienced before. And if the whispers about the coordinates were true, then humanity was no longer just defending, they were looking for the KRYTH's heart. The storm over the city broke briefly, revealing a sliver of pale morning light. From the bunker entrance, Lien watched it filter through the smoke, catching on the wet ruins. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her why they were still fighting. She didn't know yet whether they'd defend Earth or strike at the KRYTH's core. But whichever they chose, there would be no turning back. The next move would decide more than the fate of one planet, it would decide the balance of power in every Deathworld the KRYTH had ever claimed. And somewhere, far from Earth's skies, a signal pulsed quietly in the void, waiting to be heard. The bunker was quiet except for the soft hum of the map projector and the distant thud of artillery in the city's outer ring. Every person in that room knew the weight of the decision ahead. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy as if the entire world was holding its breath. Lien stood at the table, staring at the shifting red and blue markers. In her mind, she could see two paths. The first, staying on Earth, throwing every soldier and every weapon into holding the city against the inevitable KRYTH push. The second, a high-risk strike on the coordinates they had intercepted. The strike team option was madness. It would mean leaving the city's defense weaker at a time when the KRYTH were preparing their largest offensive yet. But if those coordinates truly held the heart of the KRYTH's power, hitting it might be the only way to end this war before Earth was reduced to ash. Her sergeant leaned close, speaking low so the others couldn't hear. If you choose the strike, we'll be outnumbered here. You know what that means. She didn't answer right away. Outside, a dull roar echoed across the sky, a sound everyone had come to recognize. KRYTH dropships. More were arriving. From orbit, Commander Red Han stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the swarm of smaller craft descend through the atmosphere. His officers moved with efficient precision, feeding him updates on troop deployments and bombardment schedules. Yet, behind their crisp reports, there was an edge, a tension that hadn't been there at the start of this war. He knew why. The humans had been impossible to break. They didn't collapse under the kind of pressure that had shattered other Deathworld civilizations. In fact, they seemed to fight harder when the odds grew worse. Thur approached from the tactical stations. Ground forces are ready to advance once the saturation bombardment is complete. We'll take the city by nightfall. Rethan's gaze stayed fixed on Earth. And if they strike somewhere else while we focus here? Thur hesitated just long enough for Redhan to catch it. Our perimeter fleets will intercept any attempt. But Redhan wasn't satisfied. The humans were unpredictable. If they had discovered something about the HFY Sci, something vital, then every fleet in the galaxy might not be enough to stop them. In the bunker, Lien had made her choice. The strike team would go. It would be small, fast, and armed for a single purpose. Get in, destroy the target, and get out before the HFY Sci could react. She would lead it herself. The moment the decision was announced, the room erupted into controlled chaos. Maps were reconfigured, supply lists drawn up, and routes plotted. The rest of the forces in the city would hold their ground, fighting with everything they had to keep HFY Sci's attention locked on Earth while the strike team slipped away. Her sergeant caught her arm before she left the room. "You're betting all of it on this." "I know," she said simply. "But if we win here and they still have that, we'll never stop them." By nightfall, the team was assembled, 12 soldiers each chosen for speed, adaptability, and the willingness to face odds no one could calculate. Their transport was an old stealth-modified freighter, patched together from salvaged parts and painted black to vanish into the void. Above the planet, HFY Sci fleets tightened their net. Orbital platforms powered up, and the first phase of the bombardment began. From the surface, it looked like the sky itself was catching fire, columns of light lancing down, turning streets to molten glass. The city shook under the impact. Lien's team used the chaos to launch. The freighter rose from a hidden launch site far from the front lines, its engines barely audible under the thunder of the bombardment. They slipped past patrols, masked by the energy spikes of the HFY Sci's own weapons. From his flagship, Redhan scanned the planet for signs of unusual movement. Something nagged at him, a sense that the humans wouldn't just wait for the end. But the sheer volume of activity below made it impossible to isolate anything out of place. In the freighter's cockpit, the pilot kept his voice low. "We're clear of the atmosphere." Engaging silent running. The stars stretched out before them, cold and distant. Somewhere beyond them, deep in enemy territory, waited the coordinates. The journey would take hours. Every minute was a race against time, against the HFY Sci's assault on Earth, against the possibility that their target could be moved or reinforced before they arrived. On the flagship, a comms officer approached Redhan with a fragment of intercepted transmission. It was brief, badly scrambled, but one word stood out, a translation they had learned in the early days of the war. "Strike." Rethan's grip tightened on the railing. "Find them," he ordered. "Now." In the city, the bombardment continued. Entire districts vanished in bursts of blinding light. The defenders dug in, fighting block by block, forcing the HFY Sci to pay for every meter of ground. Civilians sheltered in underground chambers, listening to the muffled roar above, wondering if the next strike would be the one that ended them. On the freighter, Lien stared out at the void, her thoughts a blur of strategy and memory. She thought of the families still hiding in the ruins, the soldiers holding the lines, the countless voices that had fallen silent since the invasion began. All of it came down to this mission. The pilot broke her thoughts. "We're approaching the edge of HFY Sci-controlled space." Everyone checked their gear in silence. No one spoke about what might happen if they were caught. In the command chamber of the flagship, Rethan's tactical map lit up with a faint trace on the edge of their detection grid. A single vessel, small, moving fast. He didn't have proof it was the humans, but he didn't need it. Redirect perimeter patrols. Intercept at all costs. Back in the freighter, the proximity alarms flashed red. The pilot's voice was sharp. HFY Sci patrol incoming. "We've been spotted." Lien didn't hesitate. "Cut power. Let them pass." The ship drifted in the darkness, systems cold, the crew holding their breath. Outside, the HFY Sci patrol ships swept past, their search beams cutting through the black. For a moment it seemed they had slipped through. Then one of the beams swept back. The search beam froze on them, a thin shaft of light cutting across the freighter's hull like a blade. No one moved. Every breath in the cabin felt too loud, too sharp. Then the comms crackled. an alien voice speaking in the guttural, clipped rhythm of the KRYH tongue. The pilot didn't need translation to understand the tone. They'd been ordered to stop. Lien's mind raced. If they powered up now, the stealth systems would be useless. If they stayed still, the KRYH would lock on with a tractor field and haul them into custody. Neither option would get them to the target. Before she could decide, the ship jolted violently. The KRYH weren't trying to capture them, they were firing. A spray of energy blasts streaked past, close enough to shake the hull. The pilot reacted instantly, engines roaring to life as the freighter pitched hard and dove into the dark. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. The KRYH patrol wasn't alone. 2 more ships were converging, cutting off escape routes. The freighter banked sharply, slipping between their firing arcs, but the enemy was faster and better armed. Her sergeant grabbed her shoulder for balance as the ship rattled under another near miss. "They know where we're going," he shouted over the noise. "They're not just chasing us, they're hurting us." The realization hit like ice. If the KRYH knew their destination, it meant one thing: the coordinates had been bait. The heart of the chain wasn't their weakness. It was a trap. But Lien's gut told her there was more. The KRYH didn't risk this much just to kill a strike team. If they were trying to lure them in, it meant whatever was there mattered to both sides more than she had guessed. The pilot threw the ship into a spin, dumping countermeasures that flared in the darkness like dying stars. 2 of the pursuing ships broke formation, chasing the false targets. The freighter surged forward, engines burning hotter than they were ever meant to. In orbit above Earth, Redhan stood over the tactical display, watching the blip of the human vessel threading dangerously close to the KRYH defense perimeter. His officers advised deploying heavier intercept forces, but he shook his head. He wanted them to reach the coordinates, because what awaited them there would end their resistance for good. On the freighter, Lien gripped the console as the stars blurred into streaks. "We keep going," she ordered. Her sergeant stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "If it's a trap, then we spring it," she cut in. "Because if it's not, this is the one chance we'll ever have." The journey into KRYH space grew more dangerous with every minute. Patrols swarmed, forcing the pilot into increasingly desperate maneuvers. Each time they slipped past, the tension in the cabin wound tighter. Every soldier knew that the deeper they went, the smaller their chance of making it back. Then, as the enemy pursuit momentarily thinned, their sensors picked up something unexpected. A second human vessel. It was faint, barely holding together, drifting with damaged engines and no active comms. Judging by its scars, it had been in battle, recently. Lien's breath caught. The KRYH weren't the only ones out here. If this ship had made it this deep, it might mean Earth wasn't fighting alone after all. Or, it might mean there were survivors from an earlier mission they'd never been told about. They moved in close, running a quick scan. Life signs, weak but present. And on the outer hull, barely visible under layers of carbon scoring, was an old Earth military emblem. Her sergeant's eyes widened. This ship vanished 2 years ago. Before they could dock, the KRYH patrol reappeared, this time with reinforcements. Energy fire ripped past, forcing the freighter to juke away. The damaged human vessel drifted between them and the enemy as if shielding them. Then, without warning, it powered up weapons that should have been long dead and fired straight at the KRYH ships. The blasts were wild, inaccurate, but enough to scatter the formation and give Lien's crew a window to escape. The damaged ship's comms flickered to life for a moment, just long enough for a voice, ragged and faint, to say, "Finish it." Then the signal died and the KRYH ships closed in on the decoy, tearing it apart in a storm of fire. Lien's hands clenched into fists. Whoever they were, they'd bought her team the chance to get through. She wasn't about to waste it. The freighter plunged deeper into KRYH space, chasing the coordinates that might end the war, or doom them all. But now the stakes had doubled. If others had already tried and failed, then this mission wasn't just about victory. It was about finding out what the KRYH were hiding that was worth luring humans to their deaths. Far ahead, their sensors pinged. The target was close. And whatever it was massive. The moment the target appeared on their sensors, the entire crew fell silent. No one had imagined it would be this colossal. Suspended in the black, hidden inside a fractured asteroid field, was a structure unlike anything they'd seen before. It wasn't just a KRYH fortress, it was alive. Organic and mechanical parts fused together, pulsating faintly as if the whole thing had a heartbeat. The pilot's voice cracked through the quiet. "We've got incoming, everywhere." Dozens of KRYH ships were positioned around the structure in layered rings, like predators guarding their nest. Each one was armed for war and each one was on high alert. Whatever the heart of the chain was, this was it. Lian's mind worked fast. The defenses were too heavy for a head-on approach, and the stealth field wouldn't last long this close. She scanned the structure's surface until she saw it. A faint opening near the lower hemisphere, pulsing with light in sync with the whole fortress. "That's where we hit," she said. "One shot right there. If the pulse stops, the chain breaks." Her sergeant looked at her like she was asking them to take out the sun with a slingshot. "We'll never get close enough." She glanced back at the crew, seeing the same fear in their eyes she felt in her chest. But there was no other choice. "Then we make them chase us in." The freighter surged forward, engines screaming at their limit. KRYH ships broke formation to intercept, swarming toward them like a living wall. The pilot weaved through the chaos, rolling the ship between blasts, skimming so close to enemy hulls that the metal glowed from the near misses. Inside, every soldier clung to their stations as the structure loomed larger and larger. The opening was just ahead, but so were half a dozen KRYTH interceptors. "Hold steady," Lian ordered, her hands gripping the console. The freighter dove, spinning through the narrow gap between two ships. The opening was seconds away. She could almost feel the heat of the fortress's pulse through the hull. Then an energy blast slammed into the rear of the freighter. The cabin exploded in sparks. Warning alarms blared as the pilot fought to keep them from spinning out. Systems were failing, shields gone, engines at half power. The sergeant's voice was raw. "We can't take another hit." Lian's gaze locked on the opening. They were close enough now for one chance. She turned to the weapons officer. "Load everything we've got into the main railgun." "Everything." The officer hesitated. "That'll burn the weapon out." "Do it." The ship steadied just long enough for the shot. The railgun fired, the recoil rattling the hull like an earthquake. A streak of light tore across the void, vanishing into the fortress's opening. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the pulse faltered. Once, twice. And then the entire structure convulsed. Light poured from its seams as if something deep inside had been torn apart. The KRYH ships around it broke formation, their tight discipline replaced by frantic, disordered movements. "We did it," the sergeant breathed. But before they could turn away, something else happened. The fortress wasn't just dying, it was releasing something. The organic plating peeled back like petals, and from its core, a massive sphere of pure energy emerged. It wasn't a weapon, it was a signal. Lian's stomach dropped. This wasn't the heart of the KRYH's power, it was the heart of their chain. A network. A call. And now that it was free, it was broadcasting. The pilot's voice was sharp with panic. "They're not losing control, they're calling for reinforcements. From everywhere." On the flagship, Redhan stared at the readings. The humans had destroyed the containment, and now the signal was spreading across star systems. It wasn't just summoning fleets, it was waking something older. Something the KRYH themselves had buried for centuries. In the freighter, the crew watched as the energy sphere rose into the void, expanding in every direction. The KRYH ships ignored them now, scattering like insects from a flood. Whatever was coming, even their enemy feared it. Lian's sergeant turned to her, eyes wide. "What have we done?" She didn't answer. Because in the back of her mind, she realized the truth. Earth had just won this battle, but in doing so, they might have started a war no one in the galaxy was ready for. The signal's pulse grew louder, deeper, almost like a voice whispering through the metal of the ship. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, something answered. The sphere's light faded into the black, but its presence lingered, like an echo that refused to die. The freighter floated in the aftermath, systems damaged, shields flickering, and the crew silent. The KRYH ships were gone, vanished into the void as if retreat was the only instinct left to them. Lian sat in the pilot's chair, staring at the space where the fortress had been. In her chest, the victory felt hollow. They had destroyed the heart of the KRYH chain, yes, but in doing so they had freed something they didn't understand. Something that even the KRYH had feared. Her sergeant broke the silence. "The signal, it's still out there." She nodded. "We can't stop it now." The weapons officer looked from one to the other. "Then what's next? Do we warn Earth? Or do we tell them we won?" Lian's fingers traced the edge of the console. She thought of the people still fighting on the streets of Earth's cities, of the countless lives already lost. "We tell them both. They deserve the truth." The pilot set a course for home, though the navigation computer groaned with errors. They were deep in KRYH territory, far from safe routes, with fuel cells barely holding together. But the path back wasn't just a matter of coordinates, It was a question of whether Earth would still be there when they arrived. The journey felt longer on the return. There were no more battles to fight, no more orders to give, only the slow burn of the engines and the soft hum of life support. In those quiet hours, each of them carried their own thoughts. The sergeant polished his rifle without speaking. The pilot kept the comms open, waiting for news that didn't come. And Lien sat in the dark of the crew quarters, replaying the last moments in her head, the light, the pulse, and the way the KRY had fled. When they finally crossed the edge of human-controlled space, the comms came alive with desperate voices. Earth was still standing, but the war wasn't over. The KRY had withdrawn from some battlefields, leaving shattered cities and burning skies, but in others they fought with renewed ferocity, as if driven by something more than conquest. It was clear the enemy had changed. Whether it was fear or orders from whatever that signal had awakened, the KRY weren't the same army they had faced before. The freighter limped into orbit above Earth. The planet below was scarred, vast swaths of land darkened by fire and smoke, ocean stained where ships had burned. From this height, the war's brutality was undeniable. And yet, lights still twinkled in the night. Cities still glowed where humans had refused to fall. When they landed, the survivors stepped out into the cold air, their boots sinking into mud made from rain and ash. Soldiers from the defense lines met them, their uniforms tattered but their eyes sharp. No one cheered. No one smiled. The war had taught them that victories came with too high a cost to celebrate. Lien gave her report in the War Council chamber, a room lit by a single strip of pale light, the air thick with the scent of smoke and damp stone. She told them everything: the fortress, the pulse, the fleeing KRY, and the signal. Some council members leaned forward in disbelief, others sat back with the weight of inevitability in their eyes. One of the older generals spoke, his voice quiet but steady. If the KRY feared this thing, then it may be worse than they ever were. And if it's coming, we have no way of stopping it. We can prepare, Lien replied. We've done it before. The general shook his head slightly. War against an enemy you can see is one thing. War against the unknown, that is something else. Outside the chamber, she walked through the camp where the wounded lay in long rows under makeshift shelters. Some smiled weakly at her as she passed, as if her presence meant hope. Others didn't notice, lost in their own memories of what they'd seen. She knew that whatever was coming next, these people, scarred and weary as they were, would face it. Humans always did. In the weeks that followed, the KRY front fractured further. Some fleets surrendered outright, abandoning their warships to drift in orbit. Others retreated to the far reaches of space, ignoring human pursuit. The official line was that humanity had driven them back through sheer resilience. But those who had heard the truth, those who knew about the signal, understood it was only part of the story. Lien spent her days between rebuilding efforts and strategy briefings. At night, she would walk the perimeter of the camp, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the sphere's call was still traveling, still reaching for whatever had answered it. Her sergeant joined her one night, hands buried in his coat pockets. You think it's really coming? She didn't look at him. I think it's already moving. He was quiet for a moment. Then maybe the KRY were just the first wave. Maybe they softened us up without even knowing it. Maybe, she said. But there was no fear in her voice, only the steady acceptance of someone who had already chosen to stand her ground. Months later, when the first strange readings began to appear on deep-range scanners, humanity didn't panic. They didn't surrender. Instead, they fortified, they trained, and they remembered that even the deadliest Deathworlders in the galaxy had once looked at Earth and fled. The war with the KRY had ended not with their destruction, but with their retreat. And in its place, a new war was brewing, one that might unite the galaxy in fear or tear it apart entirely. Lien stood on the observation deck of a rebuilt station, the blue curve of Earth below and the endless dark above. She thought of the battles fought, the friends lost, and the moment in the fortress when they had chosen to fire, knowing it might doom them all. She didn't regret it. Because in war you fought with the knowledge you might lose everything. And humanity had learned, again and again, that the only way to survive was to face the unknown head-on. As the station sensors tracked a faint, steady pulse in the farthest corner of space, she felt no fear. The next war was coming. And Earth, scarred, stubborn and unbroken, would be ready.